Good morning, everyone. I just need you to know something. I'm going to be distracted all morning because I have a cinnamon bun up here. There was a specific gentleman who said, I'm going to put one on the pulpit and see how that goes. And I said to him, I might eat it in front of everybody, and I'm still debating whether I should or not. Some of you are thinking, I'm going to get after him if he eats that in front of me right now. But anyways, yep, that's going to be there. I'll be smelling it all morning. So I'm surprised Andrew was able to stay up here and not swipe half of it. Although there's been a lot of sugar in the church this last week, hasn't there? Lots of celebrations and things. Anyways, this morning we are going to look at a story in 2 Kings chapter 3. Now, I'll read that story a little later, but I'm going to tell you some background about it. Before we get into the story, I want us to be aware of some details because I think it's helpful to understand some of the background, some of the setting of the story before we dive in. It helps make the story make a bit more sense. So this chapter we're going to look at today is going to be about a war. The kingdom of Moab is going to be revolting in this story because King Ahab had died. You remember King Ahab and Jezebel. He was known as the worst king, and who led the people of Israel away from God, brought Baal worship, and set up a whole bunch of different things like that, idolatry, into the nation. And then, if you remember, there was a prophecy about him, that him and his lineage were going to die out. And so we're seeing that progress happening now with him. And his next son was Ahaziah, and he was the next king in the kingdom of Israel, and he didn't reign very long. He wasn't there for very long to establish a base of power. And so then after he died, his brother Jehoram began to reign as king, and Moab saw this weakness. Moab was a nation that was subjugated by the kingdom of Israel. They had to pay a whole lot of tribute to the nation every year. Moab saw the weakness, they revolted, and they started to refuse to pay the tribute that was due. What's interesting about this story is that it has similarities to another story back in 1 Kings chapter 22. Now, I didn't preach on that story. I wanted to go through the stories of Elijah and Elisha. 1 Kings chapter 22 is kind of right smack in the middle of some of Elijah's stories, but it has a different prophet in there. Micaiah, it was his name. And Micaiah was a prophet that was known for speaking against Ahab, always giving terrible prophecies to him. And so King Ahab didn't like him at all. And while Micaiah does not give Ahab the full prophecy in that chapter, Ahab he gives him a positive one. And Ahab's thinking, this can't be it. So he presses the prophet Micaiah to give him the rest of the prophecy, and then he shares the rest of the prophecy to him. What we're going to see in this chapter today is you're going to start wondering, is that happening here in this chapter with Elisha's prophecy about this war and this battle that's coming up? Did he give them all the information, or did he withhold stuff like Micaiah was doing? I want to leave that in the back. So if you want to do some reading about that this week, take 1 Kings chapter 22 and 2 Kings chapter 3, read them side by side, and you're going to notice a lot of similarities in there. In today's story, a lot of these stories and chapters end with clarity, but not today. This chapter is going to end with confusion. You're going to be wondering, well, that's odd. Why did that happen? Why did they say that? And I'm going to leave the story actually with mystery. I don't have all of the answers for you. I just don't feel that there's sufficient evidence to give you a wonderful, nice, crystal clear answers about this chapter. Now, on one hand, the word of the prophet Elisha is going to come true. On the other hand, it's going to seem like it doesn't. I'll give you some information. Maybe you'll see something in there that I don't. But as I read the text, you're probably going to wonder what is going on. And hopefully, we'll be able to end this morning with knowing a little bit about God and then going and eating cinnamon buns. But before we dive into the text, there's some information I want to give you regarding the area, the geography. So I'm going to put a little map on the screen for you right now, and I did remember to put it in my PowerPoint this week. I checked 3 times just in case. I'm going to explain this a little bit to you so you know what's happening. I like giving this type of information. I find it helpful when I'm trying to understand a text. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to turn around and look at it here, and then you guys can look there too. If you notice that there's a light blue color kind of smack in the middle of the map, that's the kingdom of Israel. The capital of Samaria is there. King Ahab and his sons were ruling there. That's the main focus of Elijah and Elisha's ministry, is in that light blue area. South of that, in that light pink area, is the kingdom of Judah. King Jehoshaphat is ruling there at that time, while King Jehoram is in the north of the northern kingdom of Israel. Below kingdom of Judah is the yellow zone there of the kingdom of Edom. We're going to see them in this story because they're subjugated to the king of Judah at this time. So they kind of serve the kingdom of Judah. And so the three armies of Israel, Judah, and Edom are going to come together and fight against the purple zone, the kingdom of Moab. It's right just on the east side of the Dead Sea. So what's going to happen is you're going to see part of the story where the king of Judah, Jehoshaphat, says, well, should we attack Moab? Which way should we go? Well, there's a couple different ways, as you can see on the map, which way they can go. They decide to head south. So all three of the armies are going to meet together, head south, go around the Dead Sea, and then from a base of operations in the kingdom of Edom in the desert there, they're going to head north and attack the country, okay? So that's kind of the gist of what's happening. So that, I think, will help make sense with some of the details the story is going to talk about. Another thing that I want to bring about is that there's actually some archaeological evidence that goes along with this story. There's what's called the Mesha Stele. It was found in 1868 by an Anglican missionary, and this stele is a stone tablet, and we have a picture of that for you as well up on the screen. There it is, and the king in this story of chapter 3 that we're going to look at in Moab, his name is Mesha. He's the guy who had this made, okay? And so this archaeological evidence is going to verify the story that we're going to see happening here today in this chapter. And what it talks about, the stone talks about, is how the kingdom of Moab, they believed in the god Chemosh. And on the stele, it's writing about how Chemosh is disappointed and how the kingdom of Moab has allowed the kingdom of Israel to subjugate them and have them as servants and to pay tribute. And so this stele is used as a way to can be used to rile up the people of Moab to fight and to rebel against the kingdom of Israel. Anyways, that's just, if you're an archaeological buff, there is something there for you to go research a little later. But for our purposes today, and I'm going to read the story shortly, this story today tells us about the power of God and His role in the life of nations. Sometimes we wonder where God is in our lives and the issues and the problems that we have, what we face personally, or our family, or our church, or our town, or whatever it might be. Today we're going to see the hand of God in the life of nations. You see, God knows every problem that's out there. He knows all of your issues. He knows how you have struggled in your life with health, with family, with friends. He knows what's going on internally. He knows about the motivations. He knows about the doubts and the hurts and the pains. He knows what you are experiencing. And so as we look at this text today, we're going to see the problems of kings. And we're going to see how God is involved in the problems of kings. But He's also involved in your lives. And He cares. And so we're going to see the powerful hand of God at work. And His plans and His ideas are being pushed forward. So allow me to read the story for you right now. We're going to see that there's 3 problems in this text. And I'll share them with you shortly. 2 Kings chapter 3. Joram, son of Ahab, became king of Israel in Samaria in the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and he reigned 12 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, but not as his father and mother had done. He got rid of the sacred stone of Baal that his father had made. Nevertheless, he clung to the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. He did not turn away from them. Now Mesha, king of Moab, raised sheep, and he had to pay the king of Israel a tribute of 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. But after Ahab died, the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. So at that time, King Joram sent out from Samaria and mobilized all Israel. He also sent his message to the king of Judah. The king of Moab has rebelled against me. Will you go with me to fight against Moab? I will go with you, he replied. I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses. By what route shall we attack, he asked. Through the desert of Edom, he answered. So the king of Israel set out with the king of Judah and the king of Edom. After a roundabout march of 7 days, the army had no more water for themselves or for the animals with them. What? Exclaimed the king of Israel. Has the Lord called us 3 kings together only to deliver us into the hands of Moab? But Jehoshaphat asked, Is there no prophet of the Lord here through whom we may inquire of the Lord? An officer of the king of Israel answered, Elisha, son of Shaphat, is here. He used to pour water on the hands of Elijah. Jehoshaphat said, The word of the Lord is with him. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat and the king of Edom went down to him. Elisha said to the king of Israel, Why do you want to involve me? Go to the prophets of your father and the prophets of your mother. No, the king of Israel answered, because it was the Lord who called us 3 kings to get together to deliver us into the hands of Moab. Elisha said, As surely as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, if I did not have respect for the presence of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, I would not pay attention to any of you. But now, bring me a harpist. While the harpist was playing, the hand of the Lord came on Elisha, and he said, This is what the Lord says. I will fill this valley with pools of water, for this is what the Lord says. You will see neither wind nor rain, yet this valley will be filled with water, and you, your cattle, and your other animals will drink. This is an easy thing in the eyes of the Lord. He will also deliver Moab into your hands. You will overthrow every fortified city and every major town. You will cut down every good tree and stomp up all the springs and ruin every good field with stones. The next morning, about the time for offering the sacrifice, there it was, water flowing from the direction of Edom, and the land was filled with water. Now all the Moabites had heard that the kings had come to fight against them. So every man, young and old, who could bear arms was called up and stationed on the border. When they had got up early in the morning, the sun was shining on the water. To the Moabites across the way, the water looked red, like blood. That's blood, they said. Those kings must have fought and slaughtered each other. Now to the plunder, Moab. But when the Moabites came to the camp of Israel, the Israelites rose up and fought them until they fled. And the Israelites invaded the land and slaughtered the Moabites. They destroyed the towns, and each man threw a stone on every good field until it was covered. They stopped up all the springs and cut down every good tree. Only Hareseth, I was practicing that earlier this morning to get my tongue not so tied around, was left with its stones in place, but men armed with slings surrounded it and attacked it. And when the king of Moab saw that the battle had gone against him, he took with him 700 swordsmen to break through the king of Edom. But they failed. Then he took his firstborn son, who was to succeed him as king, and offered him as a sacrifice on the city wall. The fury against Israel was great, and they withdrew and returned to their own land. Interesting story, isn't it? Like I said, the story ends in a weird way, and we're left with a lot of questions. So let's tackle first things. The first problem we see in this story are water problems. Have anybody here had water problems with plumbing in your house before? Some of you are saying, don't remind me, because that's not necessarily fun to deal with. But as the story goes, Moab revolts, refuses to pay tribute, and the king the king of Israel, Ahab's other son, Jehoram, gathers allies to attack. He wants to subjugate the kingdom again of Moab. And now, while Jehoram's doom is prophesied about in 1 Kings chapter 21, it mentions that he's not as bad as his father, but he's still bad. He destroys the sacred stone of Baal in Samaria that his father had set up. And the reason I think that he did that is because Jehoram is still worshiping the Baals. But he destroys this stone to the Baals because I think it's just a testimony of his dad. And he wants to be his own king. He doesn't want to have the shadow of a former king over him. So he destroys it and sets his own pace and becomes his own king. And so his dad is left in the past. But it says that he still continued to practice idolatry, and he practiced the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. And if you look back into the scriptures, you'll notice that those sins are about idolatry. That he set up golden calves and in Bethel and in Dan and led the people of Israel away from God. So he was still practicing idolatry. This king, Jehoram, did not follow Yahweh. He was an enemy to God and to God's prophets. And after he gathered his allies for this battle, they all took a roundabout way to Moab. And it says it took 7 days to get there. Now, 7 probably means the prophetic sense of the full measure of time that it would take for these 3 armies, all of their animals and supplies, to get all the way down south and go around the Dead Sea to be able to attack it. So it's probably not necessarily a literal 7 days. The number 7 is used in terms of the fullness of time. And so that's what happened. And on the way, they ran out of water. Now, some of us are thinking, how would you run out of water? Now, you need to understand, these are 3 large armies with all of their animals. It is really hard to drag that much water with you, okay? So what they would have done is they would have relied upon streams and rivers and pools of water along the way to resupply the water for their army and for all of the animals that they were bringing with them. And so this was been an incredible amount of water, and all of a sudden they realized they're out. There's nothing around. And so they thought, well, because God brought us 3 armies together, these 3 nations together, they sought a prophet of the Lord. And guess what? It happened to be Elisha. He was there with them. So some unnamed officer tells them that Elisha is there. They go and inquire of him to talk to God and say, hey, what's going on? You know, you're leaving us here high and dry. Excuse the pun. I'm just going along with Andrew here in his jokes. And, they need water. And Moab's going to beat them if they don't have water, because they're all going to die of thirst. And so they went down and they were going to talk to him because they needed to try to fix this water problem. And I have actually a little image, a little joke up for you. I don't know if you can read that. It says at the bottom, so what did the plumber think of your suggestions, dear? And I don't know if you know a plumber that would do that to you. So no pressure to our resident plumbers, but that's kind of funny. Anyways, here they are. They've got water problems, and they're going to go to their resident plumber, Elisha, and hopefully Elisha is going to help figure things out. And that leads us to the second problem, the prophet problems, in verse 13 to 20. So first they had plumbing problems, water problems. Now they have prophet problems. Elisha wants nothing to do with them. He wants nothing to do with Jehoram, more specifically. Nothing at all. Right? Like Jehoram was a godless king who did not honor God, and nor did he, as a son, respect the work that his master Elijah had done with his dad, King Ahab. You know, Elijah had been serving there for years and trying to show them that God, Yahweh, is the only God. They defeated Baal at every turn, and they didn't repent. And so guess what? Jehoram follows in his father's footsteps. Wasn't as bad, but he's still a bad guy. And so Elisha wants nothing to do with him. It's an interesting way of doing ministry, isn't it? It's like, ah, you're a bad guy. Don't talk to me. I don't want to have anything to do with you. I'm not going to ask God to help you, is what he's saying. It's not exactly the way we do ministry today, is it? It's quite different. But because King Jehoshaphat was there with them, he conceded and said, because he's here, I will help. And that is when something odd happens. The music was called in. He asks for a harpist. Why music? One commentator said that it was to create an atmosphere of worship, so that he was there, he would listen to the harp, he'd be able to worship God, and he would go to God and be able to talk to him, and maybe the word of the Lord would come to Elisha. I don't know. It doesn't say specifically why. I do know, though, that in 1 Samuel chapter 10, there is a story of how the Spirit of God came upon Saul powerfully when he was going to become king. There were a group of prophets that came with instruments and music, and it says that Saul's heart changed in that experience. Something occurred during the worship time. I don't want to ever underestimate a time of worship with music. Music is created by God to bless us, to reach down into our heart when sometimes we're ignoring what our heart is saying. And we're able, with both our minds and our hearts, to be able to worship God fully. So he called in the music. And he's worshiping God, and he asks the Lord for a word. And it says that the hand of the Lord came upon Elisha. In the story with Samuel, or in 1 Samuel, King Saul, it says the Spirit of God came upon Saul at that time. And so you see a parallel here. Music is brought in, and the hand of the Lord, or the Spirit of the Lord, came upon them. And that's when God spoke and gave a message to Elisha. God will bring water, but not from a storm overhead. There won't be any rain. But there will be enough water for everyone, these three armies, and every animal that they're bringing with them. Now, I don't know exactly how God did that. Did he bring water from underneath the earth and it raised up? Doesn't say. One of the things about geography in that area is that there could be a storm a long ways off that you don't even see, and it could rain like crazy, and the water would rush down these valleys. They're called wadis in Israel and in that area, and the water would go and it would rush through the land, and it would leave pools of water everywhere. That could have happened. Could very well what could have happened to these guys right here. And that's interesting, because this has a role to play in how they defeat the kingdom of Moab, okay? God brought water, but we don't know exactly how he did it. So their water problems were solved. The prophet problem was solved because, Elisha will deal with Jehoshaphat. But in that same prophecy that their water problems are going to be solved, Elisha mentions that God will deliver Moab into their hands. Fortified cities and towns will be overthrown, good trees will be cut down, springs covered over, and every good field ruined. Now, that's a bit of a problem. In Deuteronomy chapter 20, it commands Israel that when they are going out to war and conquering cities and nations, especially as they're entering into the promised land, they were not to cut down the trees that bore fruit. There's a specific command about that. And so the object of war was to conquer the enemies, not destroy the land or the resources of the land. So Elisha's prophecy was not teaching that they should break the command of God, but that rather it's a description of what the three armies are going to do to the land of Moab. And perhaps this is the very thing that will make the ending of the story messy. We don't know. There's a lot of I don't knows in this story. But now let's turn to the battle. And look, more problems. Third problem, military problems. Both the Moabite army and the allied armies are going to have some problems, okay? First, let's look at the Moabite army. God brings water through the night, and when the sun's rising up, the Moabite army sees the water, the pools of water. But the reflection makes it look like blood, which is common in that area, the land and the desert and the color of the sand and everything. The reflection would look like blood. Now, the Moabites should have known better. They would have seen those sights several times all of their life. They would have seen water looking like it's blood red while they were growing up, while they're living. It was a common occurrence. So why did they think it was blood instead of water? Don't forget the details of the text. No storm came. They had no idea that it was actually water because God brought it through the night. There was no source of water. It was bone dry. They knew it was dry. There was no pools of water there the day before. So when they saw it, there was no rain, there was no storm, nothing would fill these pools. Guess what happened? They thought it was blood, and you know whose blood it was? They thought it was the Israelites, the three armies that fought each other. So what did they do? Because of the assumptions, they walked out as an army, and they found, when they got to the Israelite army, that they were still there, and the Israelites attacked them. And a battle ensues, and Moab started losing terribly. The three armies were pushing into the land of Moab. They're pushing north, and the prophecy of the Lord was coming true. The allied armies got as far as Kir Hareseth, and which was about halfway through the land of Moab. They got about halfway north. And that's where that city is. Now, it doesn't mean that they didn't go around it, conquered other areas around this city, and eventually came back to it. But this city was situated with some natural defenses, and all the allied armies, all that they could do was send warriors with slings to throw rocks and to try to kill off the people that were fortified in this city. And it wasn't working out. This would have been a long siege. And so this is where we see the problems that the allied armies ran into. They were unable to push further. The king of Moab saw that the battle was not going well for him. They were surrounded. They were pressing in. His rebellion against Jehoram wasn't exactly what he was hoping for. And so he probably had a million thoughts running through his head, like he was going to die. But the king of Moab saw that the battle was not going well. He tried to take 700 men to break through the line of Edom. Swordsmen didn't work. They retreated, went back in, and then he brought out his firstborn son and sacrificed him on the city wall. It doesn't say how, but most likely it would have been a burnt sacrifice. And I mean, you could joke around with that a little bit, and you want to be sensitive there, but what father would do that to their kids? How do we feel about our kids? Some days we're thinking, I'd like to send them outside and lock the door. But this guy does something that just doesn't make sense. Why did he do this? So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to ask you questions. I want you to think through this. He sacrifices his son, and it says that this fury against Israel burned. Was it Moab's fury that burned against Israel? Or was it God's? If it was Moab's fury, were they enraged because they were losing the battle and the king sacrificed his son, and they just were rallied in some way to push against Israel and Judah and Edom and push them back? If it was God's fury, what was the cause of God's fury? Was it the fruit-bearing trees that they possibly were cutting down or destroying the land? Was it the springs of water that were being blocked up? Don't forget they had water problems, so now they're causing water problems for others. What was it? What would have aroused the anger of the Lord? Was the son sacrificed to Chemosh, their god? Why was it done so publicly on the city wall for the nation of Israel and of Judah and Edom? Why did they have to see it? Did the prophecy say that they would conquer all of Moab? Or were there details left out, like Micaiah did with King Ahab, not sharing all of the prophecy because some of it, he didn't really want to share? I'm afraid I just have way more questions than answers for you today. This story ends in a weird way. There's a fly coming after my cinnamon bun. I'm a little protective of it, so if you see me swatting around, just don't mind me. And it's not like that I'm much of a warrior, okay? Flies escape me. But the point I want to bring up here right now is that God is a warrior. He is strong, he's calculated, and he knows all the details of every battle and every outcome. God helps us too in our battles with our problems. But He does not take away all our problems and our battles, though, does He? He lets us go through them to develop our faith and to trust in Him. These battles challenge our character and our ability to do what is right in the midst of difficulties. While God has gone before the Israelites in many battles all throughout the Scriptures and has helped them to achieve victory, especially as they were coming into the Promised Land, they still needed to do their part. They still needed to live by faith and be obedient. And we must do the same. While our struggles develop our faith and ability to live a holy life, they also push us towards something else. There's that fly again. In Romans chapter 5, verse 3 to 4, it says, suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character. And I know many of you have experienced this. And then it says, character produces hope. Our hope is in the Lord. Our hope is in the resurrection that God promises us. Our hope is in that everything will be made new and that heaven will be brought to earth in the last days and we will live with God forever. Hope is extremely powerful, and it reminds us to keep living for the Lord even when this life gives us water problems, or when it throws rocks, or when we have problems with people and we can't trust them because those people are just in it for themselves. They seek to cause harm. Remember that God is a warrior. He helps us fight our battles. He gives us the armor of God to fight against the devil's schemes and reminds us that our battle is not with flesh and blood. It sure feels like it, though, most days. But each day we face the spiritual battle to honor God in all we do with all that we are. Remember to lean in on God and to trust His word and trust in His outcomes. Now, I'm going to invite our worship team to come up now, and they're going to lead us in some music. And as they come, I want us to remember the Lord in a few ways. We worship the Lord God today, remembering that while life is filled with stuff, with millions of distractions, like paying bills, buying groceries, feeding cattle, and playing with our kids, we turn our focus back to the presence of God, who is in the details, who is with us at all times. Whether the details are problems, whether they are the joyous things of life, or whether they are the mundane things of life, like peeling potatoes. We remember God's strength to help us. We remember His grace to forgive us. And we remember His word to guide us.